Okay, Brian's going to start in about 35, 45 seconds. About 15 seconds. Okay, this video is going to be about the shooting and what's going on right now in Kenosha, Wisconsin. There's a lot going on, but first Brian's going to say this to bring more of this this particular subject into light. Now, Brian used to be guilty of this past tense. Prior to 2014, Brian used to be guilty of this. Like all of us have been guilty of it, and some to this day still are guilty of it. Now, in this video, Brian's not calling out anyone in particular. He's not talking about anyone in particular. You know Brian. If Brian was doing that, he would have done two things: send you a private message, or if he's calling you out because your language is so, your knowledge is the only one that's possibly true, and you're better than everybody else, and blah, 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 then Brian will call you out publicly. That's it. But other than that, again, this is not directed towards anyone specifically. This is all. So, but first, to have a better comprehension of this video, Brian's going to take you back to 2014, November 22nd, 2014. Brian remembers that date so very well because of three reasons. One, a young kid was involved, Tamir Rice. Remember that incident? Number two, it was with the Cleveland Police Department. Brian was born in Cleveland and lived there once and traveled back and forth there in the past. So that's the second reason why that sticks into Brian's head so much. And third, November 22nd, well, that was the year they murdered President Kennedy, not killed. Murder is not legal or lawful in the common law. Killing is, murder is not. Two different definitions. Just throw that out there. But anyway, now here's the thing. During that incident, we all saw the video. You can go on YouTube, look at the video with Tamir Rice. That particular incident, someone called the police and said some young kids out here pointing a gun at people, but it appears to be fake. Now, if you look at the video closely, and yes, this ties into what's going on in Kenosha, so Brian's going to explain very well how they both are connected from the thinking capacity part. So, back to Tamir Rice. If you look at that video closely, when Tamir Rice was doing this, the young kid, he was doing this with his toy gun. Remember that? He was doing this. And the people around were doing this. Look at the body language. They know he was a kid. They know he was playing around. So the cops were called. Now, to play devil's advocate, Brian always does that because you have to be fair on both parts. And to that note, Brian will say this also. Kind of digressing, but not really, but I want you to be aware of why Brian also uses the term devil's advocate and why he does it. When you are, many of you already know this, when you are exchanging affidavits in law, in your law business, like your civil claims, whatever, you know why you exchange affidavits for court cases proving one thing and then proving an opposing party and proving another, and blah, blah, blah. They call that ethics in law. You have to be ethical about things. So therefore, Brian, when he says to play devil's advocate, I'm being ethical about the situation to put yourself in their shoes. Brian can put himself in their shoes and vice versa. So that's why Brian does that. So be fair. Like, Brian always says 50-50. Hold on a second. Forgot this. How can I forget this part? Brian, flipping around in a second. So, back to what Brian was saying about Tamir Rice. So, remember, he was pointing the gun, cops were called, blah, blah, blah. Now, if you look at the video closely and rewind it, Brian saw that video quite a few times, rewound it, played it back, and played it again, rewound it, played it again. when the cops came onto the scene, at that point, Tamir Rice was not doing this. He wasn't doing this to people nobody else was around. Now here's the point. Now after what Brian said regarding the Tamir Rice incident, and Brian's bringing this up right now, and thank God nobody else has brought it up, so that way no one can later say, well, Brian, you're only bringing it up because so-and-so brought it up. No. Brian's bringing this up now, and has yet to see this brought up from this light, from this perspective. So, from that point, Tamir Rice is pointing the gun. It was a toy gun. Nobody seemed to be alarmed at all. You can tell by the body language. And then the cops roll up and then shoots him. What has no one talked about yet? What was not talked about? What are people forgetting? Think about it. We're going to wait about 15, 20 seconds. Think about it. What do you want? We just got fed 10 minutes ago. Keep thinking about it. And this is what Brian means. You have to think more outside the box. This is what Brian means, how we've all been guilty of this particular thing. Okay, during that incident, what did the public see? If you go on YouTube and see that video, what did the public see? Here, better yet, you're looking at Brian right now. What do you see right now? You see Brian. You see Brian's flag that he made. You see Brian's banner, his words that he came up with. You see that. You see the wall. You see that. You see Brian waving his hands. You see Brian picking up his beautiful cat, Justice. Now, what don't you see? That's the key. What don't you see? How about you? What don't you see? You know what you don't see? You don't see behind. And here's the point. Back to the Tamir Rice incident. And yes, Brian's going to talk about the Kenosha incident, but Brian wants these two to connect so you can see Brian, what he's talking about. What you don't see during the Tamir Rice incident, the cops were not on the scene at the time. He was pointing the gun, pretending to shoot, and people were just not alarmed at all. You don't see. What are you doing? You don't see from behind the camera, from the cops' perspective. The point being is the cops weren't on the scene at that time. The cops did not come into the scene until Tamir Rice was doing this. Pay attention. He wasn't pointing the gun. The gun was down. Walking around casually. Any cop or anyone with a half a freaking brain can look at that body language and see it was no threat. Anyone with a half a brain could see that it was a kid in a yard, in a playground, most likely was playing. That's the point. See, no one's talking about that, looking at it from behind the camera. If you follow, you can see what's in front. You're looking at a video. Oh, we can see the video. We can see the video, but behind you can't see that part. You follow? So the part that the cops saw, they didn't see no threat or anything like that. And on top of that, if you see that point, that video closely, Tamir Rice was just as shocked as the police were. And then police did something stupid. They came out blazing like the Wild Wild West and killed that kid without better assessing the scene. And on top of that, if someone is supposedly wielding a gun and shooting and pointing, why the hell would you drive way up this close without giving yourself some kind of cover to begin with? Those cops were stupid on the incident. And by the way, one of those cops, just so you know, it was prior knowledge that he was not recommended to be in law enforcement because he was unstable. Just to throw that in there. Now, we're talking about the Kenosha shooting. See, Brian wants to give you the perspective. You only saw, most of us only saw it through one lens, looking at it from the front view, not the back. Now, speaking of which, now how does You're probably saying by now, well, how does that could tie in what's going on in Kenosha? It's very simple. What have we been seeing on social media? What's going on as to what happened in the Kenosha shooting? What have we been seeing? We've been seeing still pictures. Brian saw one of the kid with the AR-15 on the ground being hit over the head with a skateboard. Now, skateboard is a deadly weapon. You can believe that. However, what don't we see? What happened prior to that? Did that kid provoke that incident to happen? Because you know, damn near in every state statute, there's what's called provocation. If you provoke someone to do something, you're actually the one that's guilty. You've called provoking an assault. That's what they call it. You follow? So we don't know that part. The other part, we don't know as far as the, Brian also read how, he doesn't live in Wisconsin, so he had no business being there. Don't say things like that. Because you're sounding like, if you're for the Constitution and for freedom, you're sounding like the very thing that's total opposite of that. Brian, any one of you, we can go to any state that we want to. That's our right. That's our godly given right. We can go to any state and protest if we want to help out others. That's our godly given right. So to say things like that, take that out of your mind, your mindset. Take it out of your sphere. Take it out of your world. Don't even say stuff like that. Now, Brian, again, doesn't remember who said these things. He remembers seeing these things. Who said it is relevant. Don't care. But Brian's making a point. Just like the Tamir Rice incident, we saw the incident from one view, not the whole picture. Same thing was going on here. And then Brian's also read other incidents as how one of the guys he killed, the kid killed, or maybe he killed, but Brian doesn't even know if one died or not. That's irrelevant. Well, he was a sex offender. Okay, what does that have to do with what that particular incident was going on there at that time? Frankly, if that issue was a sex offender, one less piece of corrupt, filthy shit we don't have to deal with. However, it doesn't give you the right to go up. See, that's, you know what that's like saying? Now here, take this scenario. Now some of you are not like, are not gonna like what Brian's about to say, but hey, it's the same thing. Now, to say something like that, to say, well, not even a kid or anybody for that matter, he killed so-and-so because, well, he was at least a sex offender. So what you're saying is, it was okay to do that because he was a prior sex offender. You know what that's like saying? That's like saying, you're ready for it, this is going to sting, but Brian doesn't care because it's going to give you the perfect prime example. That's like saying someone going to a protest, no matter what it's about, they see a cop there, and they see this particular cop that actually was busted for doing egregious things, was still a cop, because you know how a lot of cops are still cops for doing unlawful and illegal things. That's like saying, well, that guy killed that one cop, but that cop did so-and-so in the past. That's like saying the same thing. And we all know if that were to happen, there'll be all these Blue Lives Matters marching and blah, blah, blah. And then if someone turns around and says, well, you know, that cop did some bad things in the past. Well, he was a cop. So what? He's still a person. Point being is that pedophile, and no, so don't get it freaking twisted, right? Just give you an example. Though he was a pedophile, that's that incident that's going on, that individual's sick past had nothing to do with that incident at hand. The point being is that so-called pedophile, was he guilty of assaulting that kid or doing anything else against somebody's bodily harm right? Has that been confirmed yet? And if so, was he or was he not provoked? Has that been confirmed yet? And something else Brian just read. Apparently, the kid is 17 years old. Well, from some of the laws, you cannot even open carry until you're 18 years old. So why was he carrying an AR-15 underage? That needs to be talked about. And on top of that, Brian didn't think about this until like maybe 20 minutes ago. Does a kid have any kind of no, it's 17, but it happens a lot. Does he have any criminal malfeasance or whatever in his past? And if so, what kind? That needs to be talked about, if that even is true. His father being a cop, Brian also read this. If his father's a cop, then his father should have known better. It's hypothetical if his father allowed him to go to this march with a gun, being underage, but he's a cop and he should know better. Did that happen? That needs to be talked about. And if it did not happen, if the kid snuck away, means he's being disobedient to the parents or whatever, that needs to be talked about. And then Brian also read somewhere that he worked, I guess, near Kenosha, Wisconsin. That part's irrelevant because, again, any one of us can travel anywhere. That's dumb. That's one of the dumbest things Brian has read so far. He's not from there. However, to play devil's advocate, well, flip it. He does not live there. Okay, did he go there to provoke something? That needs to be talked about. There's too many variables. And then some of y'all, because Brian hears this all the time and has been hearing this for like 10 years. Oh, Brian, you're being too analytical. Yeah, because when Brian tells people, tell people this, when they tell Brian you're being too analytical, you know what Brian's telling them? Oh, you mean that Brian's too fucking intelligent to pick out your fucking bullshit lies. So you're just pissed off and you're coming up with a term to frame Brian in to try to deter Brian from your lies and bullshit. That's what you're really saying to Brian. You're too analytical, you damn Skippy. And law enforcement, when you're dealing with things of this serious nature, you have to be that analytical. You have no choice. Because you put yourself in that position being in law enforcement. Now, let's talk about the shooting with the kid. Well, to me, he's a kid because I guess he's like in his 20s. Well, Brian's pushing 49, so to Brian's sense, you're a kid anyway. Now, on the video, from what Brian saw, and there's just more videos that have surfaced since, one thing Brian saw with the Kenosha shooting, the kid, he was seeming like he was pissed off. He was walking around. That's not a furtive movement, by the way. Furtive, when they say in law, a furtive movement is like a sudden movement. That's a sudden movement. That's a furtive movement. When you're doing this, that's not reason to shoot. When you're doing this, it's the movement. When you're doing this versus different story, or different story, or different story. Furtive movement. See, a lot of things people say, they don't know law. That's the problem. They know opinions. They know emotional opinions, but they don't know law and procedures. That's another problem. And those are the kind, unfortunately, those are the kind prosecutors like to get on the jury, because the jury likes to, a lot of jurors, they like to decide on their emotions, which have gotten a lot of innocent people wrongfully convicted of a crime they never freaking did. Which reminds, Brian, just to slightly digress a little bit, when you hear the term, for example, like Brian goes and some of you on here say they're going to trial for God knows what, doesn't matter. Well, you've been picked by a jury of your peers. Really? Okay. Does any of the jurors know the Constitution or the state Constitution and how they are supposed to be not enacted? How the amendment's supposed to be enacted and enforced? No. Does any of them know statutes or the policies behind them? No. And Brian can go on. Bottom line is, and they're not a jury of my peers. A jury of your peers means they have to have some kind of knowledge of the information and also other laws, whatever, that guides that information to the surface or bring the truth out. If they don't, then it's not a jury of my peers. It's as simple as that. But Brian just wanted to get that, throw that in there. Anyway, back to the case. So the gentleman is walking around to his car, not a furtive move. He's not doing that. That's a furtive move. Different story, right? Or Brian, wow. The guy is walking to his car, open the car door. He's reached in, lit him up 7 times. Brian also read that he was going for a knife. Has that been discovered? And that's kind of dicey because Brian's also read he had kids in the car. One would think no one's going to really put their kids in jeopardy when you have, and we all know that he knew he had guns drawn on him. So that doesn't make sense. And then we also saw that something, but it was very blurry. Something was in his hand, and it looked like it was a little bit limp. So that may have been his keys with some kind of leather strap to his keys. Or it could have been one of those knives that were, those the survival knives or those tactical knives that are like a little bent. It could have been that. But here's the thing. If that allegedly knife was already in his hand, and he's reaching in his Jeep and they shot him and said, well, he was possibly going for a knife. That doesn't make sense. Because if he was going for a knife, but the knife was already in his hand, how could he have been going for a knife that was already in his hand and they didn't shoot him before he went into the car? That needs to be taught. See, there are too many variables. And the point being is, going back to the Tamir Rice incident, Brian's talking about looking at what Brian always says, the whole and complete picture, to think outside the box. Yeah, and Brian's going to hear this too because he's heard this many times before. Well, Brian, people don't really think like that. Or Brian, you're thinking too much. Or Brian, people don't think like you. Yeah, that's a problem. You want to know why? Again, when it comes to dealing with incidents like this, you need to be thinking like that. Why? Because once again, those emotional feelings have gotten a lot of innocent people wrongfully convicted because they're thinking in a lazy form. Hell, this thing hasn't even been thoroughly investigated by investigators yet, for crying out loud. Has it? No. Brian knows for a fact it hasn't. Just taking on those law enforcement classes, being in it, and constantly on a continuous basis studying this shit for over 8 straight freaking years. So that hasn't even come out. See, another thing Brian will suggest, and Brian's going to do this from now on, and Brian thought about this yesterday. Incidents like this that occurs, no matter if it's in Kenosha, Wisconsin, Los Angeles, California, Las Vegas, Nevada, Phoenix, Arizona, Kennebunkport, Maine, doesn't matter. New York City, New York, Miami, Florida, doesn't matter. Brian's going to start doing, the first thing he's going to start doing, he's going to pull up the paper of that city and see what they write about it. Because for the most part, the city that it occurred in, they're going to be more apt to write more of the truth and give more detail about the situation versus all of us. And Brian used to be guilty of it also, but not anymore, versus getting our information on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Yahoo search engines, or whatever. So Brian's like, just for example, tomorrow Brian's going to pull up the Kenosha, Wisconsin newspaper and see what they've written about it. Or see what they've written about it. And possibly Brian won't get a hold of them because I'm sure that the phone, this individual's phone voicemail will be bombarded with messages. He's going to try and call the editor of whatever article that he reads and get some more information that way. So that's a suggestion from Brian to you all to do that. So, what else did Brian read? The gentleman in question that was shot 7 times. Apparently, he was there to break up a fight, and then Brian also read that, no, he was there assaulting somebody. So, Brian will say this. There has been 5,000 wrongfully convicted individuals let out of prison since the 90s, only on DNA evidence. And Brian looked this up about a couple of weeks ago. In Dallas County in Texas, the prosecutor openly admitted there's been 35 wrongfully innocent people let out of prison within a 10-year period. Now let that sink in. Oh, but it gets better. The Dallas County prosecutor openly admitted there's roughly, ready for this shit, 200 possibly innocent people they have to review. Let that sink in. Well, Brian, what's your point on this? Wait for it. there are approximately 3,140 something counties in this country. That's one county. Here's the point. Instead of all the wrongfully convicted that got wrongfully convicted by an actual jurors, imagine if those individuals or all individuals were facing a jury of the peers from Instagram, Twitter's, what's the other one? Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Yahoo. The emotional pain, that would triple. The point being is, instead of 5,000 wrongfully convicted, it'd probably be more like 25,000. Point being is, again, and Brian used to be guilty of it also. From now on, Brian's suggestion to all of you, don't care. Brian don't give a shit if you black, white, extreme liberal, extreme conservative, extreme Green Party, extreme Libertarian Party, which is kind of like the Green Party. Brian don't give a shit. Brian's suggestion to you all, wait till all of the information is out. Because the other thing is, and Brian was guilty of it also, subconsciously, we're kind of excited to talk about it. It's like, we want to talk about it. Don't do that. You try to hold some discipline and just wait. Because we're going back to the 17-year-old kid again. His intentions needs to be investigated. Going back to the guy that was shot in the back 7 times, the cops' intentions, the alleged evidence that they acquired prior to that needs to be investigated. It still has yet to be confirmed if he was allegedly reaching for a weapon. Was there a weapon involved or anything? That has to be confirmed. Again, if it was Brian read he was reaching for a knife, but if he already allegedly had a knife in his hand before he went to the car, how can you be reaching for the same thing that's currently in your hand and push you going to your car to get? That doesn't make sense. It's not logical. And this is why Brian decided, and Lauren Angelica Law, you said something on one of the comments. Thanks, by the way. You said Brian, a professor. But before, in all seriousness, about a year ago, Brian decided that's what he's going to do. That's another reason why he studied all that he studies, because Brian's he's not seasoned yet. He knows a lot, but not seasoned. And that's what Brian's going to do. Hopefully he gets a lot of donations, open up his own schooling and start teaching people from different perspectives of the law, from different perspectives of criminal law, from different perspectives of law procedures, different perspective on the Constitution, on constitutional law and the court case decisions. Like, for perfect example, with the Griswold versus Connecticut case, where Brian read to you all how the justices cited another court case in the Griswold versus Connecticut court case, saying how information is free, information cannot be controlled by a state. Well, Brian's going to flip that and let people know, good, that also means you cannot control Brian or anybody else for teaching free information about anything, especially law. That was the point of that. But anyway, kind of digress. And another point, again, say for example, what happened in Kenosha, the police were kind of in the wrong, but Brian will say this. That reminds Brian of what happened to Daniel Letton Shaver. Remember him? The incident that happened in Arizona with that stormtrooper, RoboCop, super cop, trigger happy cop that Brailsford that murdered him like that. You remember? You all saw the video with the AR-15 rifle. Brian's gonna talk about that, the AR-15 rifle. Remember, some of y'all may be too young. Remember 1996, I believe it was, or 95, 96, the Hollywood shootout, the bank robbery, the Hollywood shootout, the infamous, they call it if you Google a Hollywood shootout, a bunch of links will pop up. Well, the bank robbers had automatic AK-47 assault rifles. There's a difference. Automatic, that's an assault rifle, one that fires one shot at a time. That's an AR-15. It's a big difference. Brian just wanted to throw that in there also. Anyway, from that point on, that's when they decided to have police around the country carry AR-15s in the trunk of their cruisers in the event, listen carefully, in the event that they come across a situation where they have to combat force with force. When they have to combat a rifle against another rifle. A lot of cops, and you all have seen them, been off the chain bringing out, Brian just posted a link about that man they lit up, that homeless man they lit up at the bus stop with about 3 or 4 of them had AR-15s. That was uncalled for. So a lot of cops have been getting carried away with bringing out the AR-15. I don't know if they think because their dicks are too small or their confidence is not that high, they're very insecure, maybe they're pissed off because their wife or girlfriend is gonna leave, whatever. They're overzealous. They may feel they have to compensate for the law. I don't know. But they've gotten too carried away with the AR-15, trying to not match force with force, but overpower something that needs much less force. It's as simple as that. There's a Las Vegas Metro cop out here that got fired for the same thing, taking an AR-15 to a scene and ended up killing somebody when it was not even necessary. That's like, what, the third Las Vegas Metro cop that's been fired in like 20 years, which should be more like 20 by now, but that's a different discussion at a later date. No, in the Kenosha incident, they didn't use AR-15, but that was so far, the evidence so far proves that they were kind of overzealous. So far. But again, everything has not come out yet. The investigation has not been concluded yet. The rioting, destroying people's property, hitting, yes, Brian's gonna say this, Brian saw a video hitting a cop behind his neck. That's some pussy move shit right there. That's an ambush. Ambushes, Brian told you, Brian doesn't believe in ambush. If you got a personal problem with somebody, Brian will say this on the record and for the record, and you can quote Brian on this. If you got a personal problem with a cop, an attorney, a CEO, a janitor, a newspaper man, an editor, a carpenter, a lumberjack, a fisherman, whoever, you deal with them personally. Don't involve anybody else in it. That's not right. And some of you are right now probably saying, I can't believe Brian has said that. Well, fucking believe it, because Brian just fucking said it. And Brian's serious. If you got a personal problem with anybody, is the point, doesn't care. Brian doesn't give a fuck what profession they're in or what they do 8 hours on a shift. That's irrelevant. If you got a personal beef with somebody, you deal with them. Don't bring other innocent people into the fray that has nothing to do with it. They don't know what the hell they're talking about, or don't know what you're talking about. Don't even know what your grievances are. And frankly, Brian don't like ambush him. You got a problem with somebody, you knuckle up on them like face to face like this. Don't be waiting until their backs are turned. That's some pussy shit. What, you trying to compensate for something you don't have down here also? Or you just weak-minded? What? You got a problem with somebody, you face them face to face. Man up. This is another problem with nowadays. People don't do that. Whatever. But anyway, so in closing, look at the bigger picture. Think outside the box. Wait till all of the evidence is out. And this is why. You see this 50-50? What does Brian always say? Because it's fair. 50-50. And yeah. Brian, well, life ain't fair. Brian, that's not being realistic. And Brian, blah, 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 blam. In Brian's world, once Brian gets involved, it's going to be 50-50. And if those that tries to derail Brian from making it sure that it's 50-50, you and Brian gonna have some words, possibly some blows. Because once Brian gets into the fray, once his mindset gets into the fray, it's gonna be 50-50. And again, Brian doesn't give a shit if you're atheist, doesn't give a shit if you're Muslim, doesn't give a shit if you're Christian, doesn't give a shit if you're Hindu, practice Hindu, if you're Buddhist, pardon. Brian doesn't give a shit if you're Catholic. Brian doesn't give a shit if you are a racist white man that hates all colors. And Brian doesn't give a shit if you're a racist black man that hates all colors. Brian doesn't give a shit if you're a racist Asian that hates all. Brian doesn't care about any of that crap. Brian cares about fairness within the freaking laws. That's it. And if that's unrealistic, Brian begs to differ. And do you want to know why? Huh? Well, because Brian thinks opposite. Now, do you honestly believe that Brian's the only one out of 7.5 billion people that actually believes that? No. So don't tell Brian some bullshit how, well, that's unrealistic and blah, blah, blah. Brian's always told you all. When Brian hears the odds, don't always tell Brian the odds. Brian don't give a shit about the odds. Well, that's 1 in a billion chance or 2 in a billion chances. What about the one? To round it up, there's 8 billion people on the planet. If you tell Brian, like Brian's telling you all to think more outside the box and look at all the evidence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you tell Brian there's 801 billion of a chance of that happening, then Brian will bow down and say, yeah, you're right, because you've eliminated everyone on the face of the planet. But when you start saying there's 1 in 1 millionth of a chance or 1 out of 10 million, what about the one? That's how Brian thinks. Brian don't give a fuck about the odds. So point again, start thinking with more clarity. Start thinking with more clearness. Start looking at the whole picture. Start looking at the ginormous man-work picture. Start looking at it from both angles, from the front of the camera and behind the camera. You feel? And that's all Brian has to say about that. Deuces.